The train whistle pierced the quiet Montana evening, jolting Abigail Kent from her fitful slumber as the locomotive lurched into Timber Creek Station. Her hands trembled as she clutched the worn letter promising a husband, prosperity, and escape from the cramped Boston tenement where she'd spent 22 years of her life. Through the soot-stained window, the autumn sunset cast long shadows across a dusty main street lined with weathered buildings. Her new home in 1876, a far cry from the grand frontier paradise depicted in the Marriage Bureau advertisement. The train shuddered to a stop. Abigail smoothed her blue traveling dress, the nicest garment she owned, and adjusted the simple bonnet framing her face. She gathered her single valise, holding everything she owned in this world, and stepped onto the platform, searching anxiously for the man whose sparse letters had brought her 2,000 miles west. No one approached. As passengers dispersed into waiting arms of family or trudged toward the saloon, Abigail remained alone on the platform. The station master locked the office door, tipping his hat as he passed. "Station closes now, miss. You being met?" "Yes, sir. My fiancé, Quinn Jameson." The words still felt foreign on her tongue. "He owns a ranch outside town." The station master's expression shifted. "Jameson Place? That's 15 miles north. No, Jameson's been to town in weeks." Cold dread settled in Abigail's stomach. There must be some mistake. His letter said, "Miss, night's coming. Town's got one boarding house down the street." He pointed toward a 2-story clapboard building. "Mrs. Holloway's. Tell her Harv sent you." With her valise feeling twice as heavy, Abigail trudged down the rutted street. Mrs. Holloway, a stout woman with iron-gray hair twisted in a severe bun, listened to Abigail's predicament with pursed lips. "Quinn Jameson, you say? Paid for a bride from back east?" Mrs. Holloway clicked her tongue. "First I've heard of it, but that place has seen bad times since his brother died last winter. Been keeping to himself, that one." "Will someone take me there tomorrow?" Abigail asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Mrs. Holloway shook her head. "Storm's coming in. Nobody'll make that ride till it passes." She studied Abigail's worn shoes and thin coat. "I've got a room and can front you meals for 2 days. After that," she let the implication hang. Sleep eluded Abigail that night. What if Quinn Jameson never came? What if he'd changed his mind? Her last coins had purchased the train ticket. There was nothing left to return east with, and nothing to return to her parents, long dead, her position at the textile mill filled. When dawn broke, she descended to the boarding house dining room to find several men in ranch wear eating breakfast. "Any of you men heading toward the Jameson Ranch today?" Mrs. Holloway called out as she served Abigail a plate of eggs. The men exchanged glances. "Got no business with Jameson," one muttered. "Girl here's supposed to marry him," Mrs. Holloway announced, causing all eyes to turn toward Abigail. A tall man with a weathered face set down his coffee cup. "You Quinn Jameson's mail-order bride?" Abigail nodded, cheeks burning. "Yes, sir. I'm passing within 5 miles of his place. Can take you that far, but the sky's turning. Might be safer to wait." But Abigail couldn't wait. Each day in town depleted funds she didn't have. "I'll go today, thank you." An hour later, perched awkwardly on a borrowed mare beside the rancher's wagon, Abigail regretted her decision as dark clouds rolled across the endless Montana sky. The land stretched vast and wild around her, nothing like the crowded Boston streets. Massive pines grew denser as they climbed into the foothills, the air growing sharper with every mile. "That's as far as I go, miss." The rancher pointed toward a narrow trail cutting through the trees. "Follow that another 3 miles. Can't miss the Jameson Place first homestead in the valley." The first raindrops fell as she thanked him. Lightning flashed in the distance as Abigail urged the reluctant mare forward. Within minutes, the skies opened. Rain soaked through her dress and bonnet, plastering her auburn hair to her face. The temperature plummeted as wind whipped through the pines. The mare, growing increasingly skittish, suddenly reared at a thunderclap. Abigail, unprepared, tumbled to the muddy ground. The frightened horse bolted back down the trail, taking her valise with it. Stunned, Abigail pushed herself up from the mud. Her ankle throbbed where she'd twisted it in the fall. Through the curtain of rain, she could see nothing but endless wilderness. Terror clawed at her throat, but she forced herself to move forward, limping along the trail that was rapidly turning into a flowing stream. 2 hours passed. Abigail's teeth chattered violently as she stumbled onward, her soaked clothing offering no protection against the bitter wind. Twice she'd fallen, each time finding it harder to rise. Darkness was approaching when she spotted smoke rising beyond a stand of trees. With renewed determination, she dragged herself forward, emerging into a small, cleared valley. A sturdy log cabin stood at its center, lamplight glowing in its windows. A barn and corral stood nearby, with several horses huddled beneath an overhang. Abigail had never seen anything so welcoming in her life. She limped across the muddy yard, each step sending pain shooting through her injured ankle. At the cabin door, she raised a trembling hand and knocked. When no answer came, she knocked louder, desperation giving her strength. The door swung open suddenly, revealing a tall man with broad shoulders. In the lamplight, she glimpsed a strong-jawed face framed by dark hair and intense eyes widening in surprise. "Help me," Abigail managed before her knees buckled. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. The man lifted her as though she weighed nothing, carrying her inside and setting her gently before the stone fireplace where flames crackled. "Who are you?" His voice was deep, touched with caution. "Abigail Kent," she whispered through chattering teeth. "From Boston. I came to marry Quinn Jameson." The man grew still, his expression unreadable. "I'm Quinn Jameson." Recognition wasn't what Abigail saw in his eyes. It was shock and something that looked remarkably like dread. "I received your letters," she continued, confusion mounting. "You sent for me." Quinn Jameson's jaw tightened. "I never sent for a bride." The words hit Abigail like physical blows. But the marriage bureau, the letters, the train ticket, "Someone's deceived you, Miss Kent." His voice was not unkind, but held firm conviction. "I never contacted any marriage bureau." Darkness crowded the edges of Abigail's vision. The journey, the cold, the shock, it was too much. As consciousness slipped away, she heard him curse under his breath. When Abigail awakened, she found herself wrapped in thick woolen blankets on a narrow bed. A lamp burned low on a nearby table, illuminating rough-hewn walls. Rain still pounded the roof, and wind howled through the eaves. She tried to rise, but dizziness forced her back down. "Don't try to move yet." Quinn Jameson appeared in the doorway, carrying a steaming mug. "You're feverish." He approached, setting the mug on the table. In the lamplight, she could study him properly. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with the weathered complexion of a man who lived in the elements. His dark hair was overlong, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. Most striking were his eyes, a clear, piercing blue that seemed to look straight through her. "Drink this." He helped her sit up, placing the mug in her hands. "Willow bark tea. Tastes terrible, but brings down fever." The bitter liquid made her grimace, but she sipped obediently. "Where am I?" "My bedroom. Only one in the cabin. I'll sleep by the fire." As the fog in her mind cleared, the horror of her situation came rushing back. "You truly didn't send for me?" Quinn shook his head. "Never wrote any letters. Never contacted any marriage bureau." "But they were signed with your name. They described this ranch, said you needed a wife to help rebuild after losses." Abigail fought against rising panic. "They included money for my train passage." A shadow crossed Quinn's face. "Someone's using my name. What else did these letters say?" "That you'd lost your brother last winter, that you had a cattle ranch in need of a woman's touch, that you were looking for a practical wife, not a romantic one." She hesitated. They weren't especially warm, but they were direct, honest seeming. Quinn ran a hand through his hair. "My brother Daniel did die last winter. That much is true." He studied her with narrowed eyes. "These letters, did you bring them?" "In my valise." The horse threw me during the storm and ran off with everything I owned. Including proof of who sent you here. Quinn's expression darkened. Do you remember the name of this marriage bureau? Westward Matrimonial Society of Chicago. Quinn nodded slowly. When the storm breaks, we'll figure this out. For now, you need rest. What will happen to me? Abigail couldn't keep the tremor from her voice. Something softened in Quinn's expression. Don't worry about that tonight. You're safe here. But as he turned to leave, Abigail caught his sleeve. Please, the truth, Quinn sighed. Truth is, Miss Kent, we're snowbound for the foreseeable future. That rain's turning to snow as we speak. First big storm of the season might not clear for days, so for now, all that matters is getting you well. After he left, Abigail curled into herself beneath the blankets. Tears she'd held back since Boston finally broke free. She'd spent her last penny coming west on the promise of a fresh start, only to discover it had all been a cruel deception. With no money and nowhere to go, her future stretched before her like the vast, empty wilderness, beautiful perhaps, but utterly indifferent to her survival. Morning brought silence, the peculiar muffled quiet of a world transformed by snow. Abigail's fever had broken during the night, but her body ached and her ankle throbbed dully. Sunlight filtered through the cabin's single window, illuminating a sparsely furnished room containing little more than the bed, a chest of drawers, and a rough wooden chair where her dress hung, now clean but still damp. The door creaked open, and Quinn appeared carrying a tray. Thought you might be awake. He'd shaved, Abigail noticed, and his damp hair suggested he'd recently washed. His clean flannel shirt and the careful way he set the tray beside her spoke of consideration that touched her deeply. Thank you. She pulled the blanket higher, suddenly aware she wore only her thin chemise beneath it. You didn't need to bring me breakfast. You need to eat. He gestured to the tray holding a bowl of steaming porridge and a cup of coffee. I've got work in the barn. Holler if you need anything. Before he could leave, Abigail asked, Mr. Jameson, do you have any idea who might have written those letters in your name? Quinn's expression hardened. I have suspicions, but first things first, there's 3 feet of snow outside, and more coming. We're not going anywhere for a while. After he left, Abigail managed to rise and dress, her movements stiff and painful. The cabin proved smaller than she'd expected, just 2 rooms. The main space contained the fireplace, a table with chairs, a small kitchen area, and shelves lined with books that surprised her with their number and variety. A door led to the bedroom she'd occupied. The entire cabin was meticulously neat, with a masculine simplicity that suggested its owner valued order. She was standing by the fireplace when Quinn returned, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. He stopped short at the sight of her. You should be resting. I've rested enough. Abigail straightened her spine. Mr. Jameson, I want to earn my keep while I'm here. I can cook, clean, mend. That's not necessary. Please, her voice cracked slightly. I need to be useful. Something in her tone must have reached him, for after a moment, Quinn nodded. Stew for supper would be welcome. I've got venison in the cold room. Over the next 3 days, as snow continued to fall, they established an uneasy routine. Quinn spent most daylight hours tending to his livestock, returning periodically to add wood to the fire. Abigail took over the cooking and indoor chores, grateful for the activity that kept her mind from dwelling on her precarious situation. They spoke little during meals. Quinn answered her practical questions, but volunteered nothing about himself. At night, true to his word, he slept on a bedroll near the fireplace while she took his bed, despite her protests. On the 4th evening, as they sat at the table finishing supper, Abigail broke the lingering silence. Will you tell me about your ranch, Mr. Jameson? Quinn looked up from his plate, surprise flickering in his eyes. Not much to tell. 160 acres, 20 head of cattle, few horses. And you run it alone, since your brother passed? His jaw tightened. Yes. I'm sorry for your loss. When he didn't respond, she continued gently, Was he older or younger? Younger. By 2 years. Quinn pushed back from the table and walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. Just when Abigail thought he wouldn't speak further, he added, Daniel was always the better brother, the one with plans, dreams. I was just the muscle. You seem to manage well enough on your own. Quinn turned, his expression guarded. You don't know anything about me, Miss Kent. I know you took in a stranger during a blizzard, Abigail said quietly. I know you gave up your bed and have been nothing but honorable, despite the awkward circumstances. For a long moment, Quinn studied her, something unreadable crossing his face. It's getting late. I've got an early start tomorrow. That night, Abigail lay awake long after Quinn's breathing had deepened into sleep. Outside, the wind moaned around the cabin eaves like a lost soul. In just 1 week, her life had completely upended. The painful truth was that she had nowhere to go once the snow melted. No family waiting, no position to return to, and now, no prospective husband. Her only possessions were the clothes on her back. Dawn brought a break in the weather. Quinn departed before sunrise, explaining he needed to check fence lines while the snow had stopped. Left alone, Abigail decided to bake bread, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of kneading dough. As she worked, she noticed a desk in the corner with papers spread across it. Guilt prickling her conscience, she nevertheless approached, hoping to find some clue about the mysterious letters sent in Quinn's name. The papers proved to be ledgers, careful accounting of cattle sales, supply purchases, and outstanding loans. A name appeared repeatedly: Blackwater Mining Company. The amounts owed to this company grew with each entry, with threatening notices paperclipped to several pages. A separate sheet caught her attention, a land deed with both Quinn and Daniel Jameson's names. Beside it lay a newer document, an offer to purchase the Jameson Ranch for a sum that seemed insultingly low, given the acreage. The letterhead matched the loan notices: Blackwater Mining Company, Theodore Walsh, President. The door banged open, startling Abigail. Quinn stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous as he saw her at his desk. What do you think you're doing? His voice was dangerously quiet. Abigail stepped back. I'm sorry. I was looking for clues about who might have sent those letters. By going through my private papers? Quinn stalked forward, gathering the documents into a pile. You're in trouble with the mining company, Abigail said. They want your land. Quinn's eyes flashed. That's none of your concern. Is it possible they sent those letters? Brought me here somehow? When Quinn didn't immediately dismiss the idea, she continued, Why would anyone do that? After a tense moment, Quinn's shoulders slumped slightly. Sit down, Miss Kent. Once they were seated at the table, Quinn spoke with reluctance. After Daniel died, Walsh started pressing for payment on loans my brother had taken, loans I knew nothing about until then. When I couldn't pay, he offered to buy the ranch for a quarter of what it's worth. But why would bringing me here help him? I don't know yet. Quinn rubbed his jaw. But Walsh is ruthless. He's been trying to consolidate all the land in this valley. There's silver in these mountains. Could he have thought having a wife might make you more desperate for money? More willing to sell? Quinn's mouth tightened. Or hoped having a woman dropped in my lap would distract me while he made other moves. He studied her. How much do you know about all this? Nothing, Abigail protested. I answered an advertisement. The letters came signed with your name. I had no reason to doubt. Quinn was silent for a long moment, his gaze assessing. The snow's starting to melt in the lower elevations. Road to town should be passable in a day or two. The implication was clear. Soon she would need to leave. Panic fluttered in Abigail's chest. Mr. Jameson, I have nowhere to go. No money, no belongings. I can pay your way back east. There's nothing for me there. Abigail swallowed hard. I could work for you. As a housekeeper, not a wife. Just until spring when I might find other employment. Quinn's expression revealed nothing. This is no place for a city woman, Miss Kent. Life here is harsh. I'm stronger than I look. Abigail lifted her chin. And I learn quickly. Before Quinn could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew his attention. He moved to the window, his body tensing. "Stay inside," he ordered, reaching for the rifle mounted above the door. Abigail peered through the window to see 3 riders approaching 2 rough-looking men flanking an elegantly dressed gentleman on a gleaming black horse. "Walsh," Quinn muttered, stepping onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. From her position inside, Abigail could hear the exchange clearly. "Jameson, glad to see you survived the blizzard," called the well-dressed man, his voice carrying a false joviality. "Thought I'd check if you'd reconsidered my offer." "Nothing's changed, Walsh," Quinn replied evenly. Walsh dismounted, brushing snow from his expensive coat. "Oh, but circumstances have. You see, I've acquired the banknotes on your brother's loans, all of them. Payments due in full by the end of the month." "That wasn't the agreement." "Agreement changed when your brother died without settling his debts." Walsh smiled thinly. "Unless you've got $3,000, this land will be mine before spring planting." Quinn's stance remained steady. "You'll get your money." Walsh laughed. "How? Your cattle barely fetch $800 at market, and winter's just beginning." His gaze drifted toward the cabin window, where Abigail stood. "Though I hear congratulations might be in order. Word in town is you've taken a wife." Abigail ducked away from the window, but not before seeing Quinn's shoulders stiffen. "My personal affairs aren't your concern, Walsh." "Everything in this valley is my concern." Walsh's tone hardened. "Think about my offer, Jameson. 10 days, then I start foreclosure proceedings." After the riders departed, Quinn remained on the porch, staring after them until they disappeared over the ridge. When he finally returned inside, his face was set in grim lines. "Was that the man you suspect sent the letters?" Abigail asked. Quinn nodded. "Theodore Walsh. He wants this land because it controls the only year-round water source in the valley. Without it, his mining operation stalls in summer." "He seemed to know about me." "News travels, even in blizzards." Quinn set his rifle down. "This changes things. If Walsh knows you're here, he'll use it somehow." "Use me how?" "I don't know yet." Quinn paced the small room. "But it means you can't stay and you can't go to town either. Not until I figure this out." "Where am I supposed to go?" Alarm crept into Abigail's voice. Quinn stopped pacing, his decision apparently made. "There's an old trapper's cabin about 5 miles west. Friend of my father's lives there. Old Pete Simmons. He can get you to the train station in Bridger Falls without Walsh knowing." "Mr. Jameson," Abigail stepped toward him. "Let me help you. This isn't your fight." "It became my fight when someone used your name to bring me here," she countered. "Besides, I have nowhere else to go. At least let me stay until you deal with Walsh." Quinn studied her for a long moment. "You don't understand what you're asking. This could get dangerous." "I understand perfectly well." Abigail met his gaze steadily. "I've faced dangerous situations before. Boston wasn't exactly paradise." Something shifted in Quinn's expression, a flicker of respect, perhaps. "We'll leave for Pete's at first light. Pack whatever you can use from here. I'll replace it later." That evening, as they sat before the fire eating a simple supper, the atmosphere between them had changed. The shared adversary had created a tentative alliance, though Quinn remained guarded. "Tell me about your brother," Abigail said softly. "If you don't mind." Quinn was silent so long Abigail thought he wouldn't answer. Then, staring into the flames, he began speaking. "Daniel was the dreamer. Always had schemes for improving the ranch, making our fortune. Educated himself by reading every book he could get his hands on." A faint smile touched Quinn's lips. "Had terrible handwriting. Could barely read his own notes sometimes." "Handwriting?" Abigail set down her fork. "Mr. Jameson, the letters I received, the handwriting was very precise, elegant almost." Quinn looked up sharply. "Daniel's writing was like chicken scratch." "Then whoever sent those letters definitely wasn't attempting to forge your brother's hand," Abigail reasoned. "They wanted me to believe they came from you specifically." "Walsh wouldn't dirty his hands writing letters himself," Quinn muttered, "but he employs plenty who would." "Why would bringing a mail-order bride help his plans?" Abigail pressed. Quinn's expression darkened. "I don't know yet. But Walsh doesn't make moves without purpose. They lapsed into silence, the fire crackling between them. Abigail's mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Outside, the wind picked up again, whistling through the eaves. "Storm's returning," Quinn observed. "We might not make it to Pete's tomorrow after all." By morning, his prediction proved accurate. A fresh blanket of snow covered the ground, with more falling steadily. Quinn brought in extra firewood and spent the day working in the barn, returning only for meals. Abigail occupied herself taking inventory of supplies and mending Quinn's work shirts, which showed evidence of hasty, inexpert repairs. As darkness fell, bringing howling winds that rattled the cabin windows, Quinn returned with an old wooden box. "Found this in the barn loft," he explained, setting it on the table. "Daniel's things. Thought there might be something here to explain the loans." Together, they sorted through the contents: letters, drawings, a journal. Quinn paused over a small daguerreotype of two young men standing before a much newer-looking cabin. "Us, 10 years ago," he said quietly, "when we first built this place." Abigail studied the image. The younger Quinn stood straight-backed, serious even then, while his brother grinned broadly, an arm slung around Quinn's shoulders. "You look like him," she observed gently. "He was the better-looking one," Quinn said, a hint of his brother's smile briefly transforming his own face. Everyone said so. Deeper in the box, they found financial records and letters from Theodore Walsh dating back 2 years. Quinn's expression grew thunderous as he read. Daniel was secretly negotiating with Walsh, not to sell the ranch, but to partner with him in a sawmill operation. He shuffled through more papers. Walsh put up initial capital. Daniel put up our land as collateral. "Without telling you?" "Daniel handled the business side." Quinn's voice was tight with controlled anger. "I handled the ranch work. I trusted him." Abigail touched his arm lightly. "He was your brother. Of course you trusted him." Quinn didn't pull away from her touch. Walsh must have seen Daniel's death as an opportunity. Without Daniel's knowledge of their arrangement, Walsh could call in the loans and take the land outright. "But how does bringing me into this help him?" Quinn sat back, considering. Walsh preys on weaknesses. Maybe he thought a new bride would be a distraction, or additional financial pressure. He looked at her directly. "Or maybe he thought I'd be more likely to sell if I had someone else to worry about." The intensity of his gaze made Abigail's breath catch. This close, she could see flecks of gray in his blue eyes, the tiny scar above his right eyebrow. For a brief moment, something electric passed between them before Quinn cleared his throat and looked away. "It's late," he said, gathering the papers. "We should get some rest." That night, the storm grew violent. Wind shrieked around the cabin, finding every crack and crevice. The temperature plummeted, and Abigail piled every available blanket on the bed, still shivering. In the main room, she could hear Quinn adding logs to the fire, his movements punctuated by the howling gale outside. Unable to sleep, she wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and ventured into the main room. Quinn sat before the fire, Daniel's journal open in his hands. "You should be sleeping," he said without looking up. "Too cold." Abigail settled in the chair opposite him. "Find anything useful?" "Maybe." Quinn turned a page. "Daniel mentions meetings in a place called Widow's Creek. Says Walsh showed him silver samples from our North Ridge." "Is there silver on your property?" "If there is, Daniel never told me." Quinn closed the journal. "But it would explain Walsh's determination to get this land." "What will you do?" Quinn stared into the fire. "Fight him, somehow." Abigail hugged the blanket tighter. $3,000 is a lot of money to raise in 10 days. 9 now? Quinn's mouth set in a grim line. And with the storm, I can't even get to town to try. If we could find silver on your property, mining takes time, equipment. Even if we found a vein tomorrow, we couldn't extract enough to pay Walsh by deadline. Quinn ran a hand through his hair. Unless, a slow, dangerous smile spread across Quinn's face. Unless we can prove Walsh has been operating illegally, that the loans were predatory, made with false pretenses. How would we prove that? We need to find those meeting minutes Daniel mentioned. and we need to get into Walsh's office at the mining company." Quinn studied her thoughtfully. "Which might be where you come in, Miss Kent." "Me?" Abigail straightened. "What could I possibly do? Walsh doesn't know you, not really. He's heard rumors of a mail-order bride, but he's never seen you." Quinn leaned forward, his eyes intense. "What if you weren't my bride at all? What if you were a widow looking to invest in mining interests?" Understanding dawned on Abigail. "You want me to spy on him?" "I want you to distract him while I search his office." Quinn's gaze held hers. "It's dangerous. You don't have to do this." But Abigail was already considering possibilities. "I'd need proper clothing, a convincing story." "We can handle that." Quinn looked at her with new appreciation. "You'd do this? For a stranger?" "You're not exactly a stranger anymore, Mr. Jameson." Abigail smiled faintly. "And I don't appreciate being used as a pawn in Theodore Walsh's game." Something shifted between them in that moment, a mutual recognition of strength and determination that transcended their brief acquaintance. For the first time since arriving in Montana, Abigail felt a spark of hope. "First," Quinn said, "we need to get you to town without Walsh's men recognizing you." "When the storm breaks?" Quinn nodded. "And we'll need help." He glanced toward the window, where snow continued to fall heavily. "For now, though, we wait." The storm persisted for 3 more days. Confined to the cabin, Abigail and Quinn settled into a routine that grew increasingly comfortable. During daylight hours, Quinn taught Abigail to shoot his old revolver, explaining she might need to defend herself. Evenings were spent planning their strategy and reading from Quinn's surprisingly extensive library. On the 3rd night, as they sat before the fire discussing their plan, Quinn suddenly asked, "Why did you answer that advertisement, Miss Kent? What made you leave everything behind for a stranger?" Abigail stared into the flames. "My parents died in a factory fire when I was 17. I had no other family, so I took work at a textile mill." She twisted a loose thread on her sleeve. 5 years of 12-hour days, 6 days a week, in air so full of cotton dust you could barely breathe. Most girls in the mill were married by 20. At 22, I was considered practically a spinster. "So you came west to escape spinsterhood?" There was no judgment in Quinn's voice, only curiosity. "I came west because I was slowly dying in that mill." Abigail met his gaze directly. The advertisement promised land, fresh air, a chance to build something. Marriage was the price of admission, and it seemed fair enough. Quinn nodded slowly. "And if you had arrived to find the man you expected?" "I would have honored my commitment," Abigail said simply. "I would have been a good wife." Something flickered in Quinn's eyes before he looked away. "You deserve better than being some man's purchase, Miss Kent." "Abigail," she said quietly, "after all this, you might as well use my given name." Quinn met her gaze. "Abigail," he repeated, her name sounding different in his deep voice. "And I'm Quinn." The storm broke the following morning, revealing a transformed landscape glittering beneath a brilliant blue sky. Quinn announced it was time to put their plan into motion. "We'll ride to Pete Simmons's cabin today. He can take you into Bridger Falls tomorrow. It's a larger town. Walsh has his headquarters there. But you're less likely to be connected to me." The ride to Pete's cabin took most of the day, following game trails through snow-covered forest. Quinn rode ahead, occasionally reaching back to steady Abigail on the gentle mare he'd provided. By late afternoon, they reached a small cabin nestled against a rocky outcropping, smoke curling from its chimney. Pete Simmons proved to be a wiry, white-bearded man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. After Quinn explained their situation, the old trapper nodded thoughtfully. "Walsh has been buying up claims all through these mountains, offering pennies to folks who don't know better." He studied Abigail appraisingly. "You sure about involving this young lady, Quinn? Walsh ain't known for gentlemanly behavior." "It's my decision, Mr. Simmons," Abigail interjected firmly. "I was brought into this without my consent. I want to see it through." Pete's weathered face creased in a smile. "Got spirit, this one." He turned to Quinn. "Reminds me of your mother. She never backed down, neither." The following morning, Pete's ancient wagon carried Abigail toward Bridger Falls, with Quinn following at a distance to avoid being seen together. In town, they implemented the next phase of their plan. Using money Quinn had saved for emergencies, Abigail purchased a fashionable dress and accessories befitting a wealthy widow. Pete arranged lodging for her at the Grand Hotel, introducing her as his niece, Mrs. Abigail Kellerman, recently widowed and seeking investment opportunities. Meanwhile, Quinn took a room at a modest boarding house under an assumed name, his appearance altered by a clean shave and city clothes that transformed the rugged rancher into a passable businessman. That evening, as planned, Abigail made her entrance in the hotel dining room, drawing appreciative glances in her burgundy gown with its modestly flattering bustle. Quinn, seated in a corner, gave no sign of recognition as she was escorted to a table where, as Pete had arranged through casual gossip, Theodore Walsh dined alone. "Mr. Walsh?" Abigail approached his table, employing the refined accent she'd practiced. "Forgive my intrusion, but I understand you're the gentleman to speak with about mining investments in this region." Walsh rose, his eyes traveling appreciatively over her figure before he bowed. "Theodore Walsh, at your service, madam. And you are?" "Mrs. Abigail Kellerman, recently of Chicago." She extended her gloved hand, which Walsh kissed rather than shook. "Please join me." Walsh signaled for a waiter. "Chicago? What brings you to our humble Montana territory?" Abigail settled across from him, arranging her skirts just as she'd rehearsed with Quinn. "My late husband left me comfortably situated, but I find I have a head for business that's going to waste. I've heard silver mining offers exceptional returns." Walsh's eyes gleamed with interest. Whether in her fictional fortune or her person, Abigail couldn't tell. "You've heard correctly, Mrs. Kellerman. I own the largest mining operation in 3 territories." "How fascinating." Abigail leaned forward slightly. "I'd love to hear more about your business, Mr. Walsh." For the next hour, she endured Walsh's boasting while providing strategic encouragement that kept him talking about himself. When he finally invited her to visit his office the following morning for a private tour of our operation, Abigail accepted with exactly the right mixture of enthusiasm and propriety. Returning to her hotel room, she found Quinn waiting in the shadows, having slipped in through the balcony door as planned. "Well?" he asked, his voice tight with tension. "He invited me to his office tomorrow at 10. Abigail sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "He's exactly as awful as you described." Quinn's jaw clenched. "Did he touch you?" "Just my hand. Nothing improper." She studied Quinn's face, surprised by the fierce protectiveness she glimpsed there. "I can handle Walsh. I don't like you being anywhere near him." "We need those documents," Abigail reminded him. "This is our only chance." Quinn nodded reluctantly. "Tomorrow, then. I'll be nearby the entire time." Morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. Dressed in her new finery, Abigail arrived at the Blackwater Mining Company offices precisely at 10. Walsh greeted her effusively, offering a personal tour of the facility before leading her to his private office on the 2nd floor. There, he plied her with coffee and increasingly transparent flattery. "A woman of your intelligence must find it difficult to secure proper investment advice," Walsh said, settling behind his massive desk. "Men too often mistake a pretty face for an empty head." "Indeed," Abigail smiled coolly. "My husband made that mistake frequently." "To his financial detriment," Walsh laughed. "I like you, Mrs. Kellerman. You're direct. Allow me to be equally direct. I'm preparing to expand operations into a new valley with extremely promising silver deposits. The initial investment is substantial, but the returns will be extraordinary." "The Timber Creek Valley?" Abigail suggested innocently. Walsh's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're well informed." "I make it my business to research thoroughly before investing." Abigail sipped her coffee. "I understand there's a complication with one of the properties required for the operation. A minor issue that will be resolved shortly." Walsh waved dismissively. "A stubborn rancher who doesn't understand the value of progress." "Quinn Jameson," Abigail supplied, watching Walsh's reaction carefully. Surprise flickered across his face before his smooth mask returned. "You have been thorough in your research, Mrs. Kellerman. I find it pays to know all the factors affecting potential investments." Abigail set down her cup. "I'd be most interested in seeing the geological surveys of the area. I understand silver deposits can be quite unpredictable." Walsh hesitated only briefly before rising. "Of course. The survey maps are in our planning room, if you'll follow me." The moment they left the office, Abigail glanced toward the stairwell, where Quinn should be waiting for his opportunity. As Walsh led her down the hall, she deliberately stumbled, clutching her side. "Mr. Walsh, I suddenly feel quite faint. The altitude, perhaps. Might I trouble you for a glass of water?" Walsh immediately offered his arm. "Of course, my dear. The washroom is just this way." In the brief minutes it took Walsh to escort Abigail to the washroom and fetch water, Quinn slipped into the unattended office. Working quickly, he rifled through Walsh's desk, finding and pocketing several documents, including a letter detailing the arrangement with Daniel and a geological survey showing a significant silver deposit on the Jameson property. When Abigail returned with Walsh 20 minutes later, pleading continued lightheadedness, Quinn was long gone. She apologetically postponed their tour of the facility, promising to return the following day when she felt stronger. Back in her hotel room, Quinn waited with barely contained excitement. "I found it, Abigail. Everything we need." He spread the documents on the bed. Walsh knew there was silver on our North Ridge. He made a legitimate deal with Daniel to develop it together. But after Daniel died, he saw an opportunity to take everything, Abigail finished. Quinn nodded grimly. "These papers prove it. The original agreement specifically states that in the event of either partner's death, ownership reverts to the surviving family, not to the business partner. So the loans were legal, but calling them due immediately wasn't. There's a grace period specified here." Quinn tapped a clause in the contract. "And more importantly, Walsh has no right to seize our land even if I default. He can only claim Daniel's share of the mining profits." Abigail smiled in triumph. "We did it." "Not quite yet." Quinn gathered the papers carefully. "We still need to get these to a judge and stop Walsh before he realizes what's happening. And you need to get safely away from here before he connects you to me." "I'm not leaving until this is finished." Abigail's tone left no room for argument. Quinn stepped closer, his expression intense. "Abigail, when Walsh discovers those documents are missing, the first person he'll suspect is the mysterious widow who appeared the same day. Then we'd better move quickly." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not abandoning you now, Quinn." Something shifted in his eyes. Admiration mingled with another emotion Abigail wasn't ready to name. "You're stronger than you think, Abigail Kent." The words, spoken with quiet conviction, warmed her more deeply than she expected. Their opportunity came sooner than anticipated. That evening, a messenger arrived at Abigail's hotel room with an invitation to join Walsh for dinner at his home outside town, to continue our business discussion in more comfortable surroundings. "It's perfect," Quinn said after the messenger departed. "While you keep Walsh occupied at dinner, I can take these documents to Judge Harmon. Pete says he's honest and has no love for Walsh." "Won't Walsh be suspicious that I've accepted his invitation so readily?" Quinn's mouth tightened. "Walsh has a high opinion of his own charm. He'll believe you're simply eager for his company." The plan settled, Quinn departed to find Judge Harmon while Abigail prepared for her dinner engagement. Walsh's carriage arrived promptly at 7, whisking her to an ostentatious mansion on the outskirts of town. There, surrounded by excessive luxury that spoke of new money rather than refined taste, Walsh played the generous host, plying her with expensive wine and elaborate French cuisine. "You know, Mrs. Kellerman," Walsh said as they moved to the parlor after dinner, "I find myself quite taken with you." Abigail maintained her pleasant smile, despite her discomfort at his increasingly familiar manner. "You're too kind, Mr. Walsh." "Theodore, please." He moved closer on the settee where they sat. "I believe our business interests might align quite perfectly." and perhaps our personal interests as well. Before Abigail could formulate a diplomatic response, the butler appeared. "Sir, Sheriff Davis is here. Says it's urgent." Walsh frowned. "Excuse me a moment, my dear." The moment he left the room, Abigail moved to the window, straining to hear the conversation in the foyer. The sheriff's voice carried clearly, "Complaint's been filed, Walsh. Judge Harmon's issued an injunction against foreclosing on the Jameson property." "What?" Walsh's voice rose sharply. "On what grounds?" "Contract violation. Judge has the papers. Says you falsified terms after Daniel Jameson's death." Walsh swore violently. "This is absurd. Who filed this complaint?" "Quinn Jameson himself. He's at the judge's house now." There was a moment of silence before Walsh spoke again, his voice deadly calm. "Thank you for the information, Sheriff. I'll attend to this matter personally." Abigail's heart raced. Walsh would be coming back any moment, and his next move would surely be to confront Quinn. She needed to warn him. When Walsh returned, his charming facade had hardened into something dangerous. "Mrs. Kellerman, I apologize, but a business matter requires my immediate attention. My driver will return you to town." "Is everything all right?" Abigail asked innocently. "A minor irritation." Walsh's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing that can't be resolved permanently." The emphasis on the final word sent a chill through Abigail. As soon as Walsh's carriage deposited her at the hotel, she gathered her belongings and slipped out the back entrance. Pete Simmons had shown her where his wagon would be waiting in case of emergency behind the livery stable. The old trapper asked no questions when she appeared, breathless and frightened. "Walsh knows," was all she needed to say. Pete immediately helped her into the wagon and set off toward Judge Harmon's residence on the far side of town. They arrived to find the judge's home dark and empty. "Where would they have gone?" Abigail asked desperately. Pete considered for a moment. If the judge issued that injunction, Quinn would have headed straight back to the ranch to secure it. That's what Walsh would figure too. "We have to warn him." Pete shook his head. "Walsh's men would have taken the main road. We'll go the back way through Miller's Pass. Might beat them there." The journey through darkness on treacherous mountain trails was harrowing. Twice they had to stop to clear fallen branches, precious minutes ticking away. When they finally emerged from the forest near Quinn's cabin shortly before dawn, Abigail's worst fears were realized. 3 horses were already tethered outside, none belonging to Quinn. "Stay here," Pete whispered, reaching for his rifle. "No." Abigail grasped his arm. "We need to help Quinn." Pete studied her determined face before nodding grudgingly. "Follow my lead. Stay low." They approached the cabin cautiously. Through the window, Abigail could see Quinn standing with his back to the fireplace, facing Walsh and 2 armed men. "Doesn't matter what the judge says," Walsh was saying. "You stole those documents from my office. That's a hanging offense, Jameson." "We both know what you did," Quinn replied, his voice steady despite the guns pointed at him. "You tried to steal my brother's legacy." Walsh laughed unpleasantly. "Your brother was a fool who thought too small. This valley has enough silver to make 10 men rich. Instead, he wanted a sawmill." He shook his head in disgust. "And you even more a fool, throwing away a fortune to keep a failing ranch. This land is my home. It was my father's home." Quinn's gaze never wavered. "Not everything has a price, Walsh." "Everyone has a price, Jameson. Yours was apparently that mail-order bride." Walsh smiled coldly. "Pity she won't find you waiting when she returns from town. Tragic accident, they'll call it. Desperate rancher, facing financial ruin, takes his own life." Outside, Abigail's hand tightened on Pete's arm. The old trapper nodded toward the barn, and together they crept toward it, entering through the back door. Inside the cabin, Quinn's voice remained steady. "The judge has copies of everything, Walsh. Killing me won't change that." "Perhaps not," Walsh conceded, "but it will be immensely satisfying." That was when the first shot rang out, not from inside the cabin, but from the barn. One of Walsh's horses reared and broke free, creating instant chaos. As Walsh's men turned toward the sound, Pete fired again, this time sending a bullet through the cabin window. In the moment of confusion, Quinn lunged for Walsh, tackling him to the ground. One of Walsh's men fired wildly, the bullet splintering the mantelpiece. Quinn and Walsh struggled for control of Walsh's pistol. Abigail, following Pete's instructions, circled around to the cabin's front door. When she burst through, one of Walsh's men turned in surprise, just enough distraction for Quinn to land a solid blow to Walsh's jaw. The pistol skittered across the floor, coming to rest at Abigail's feet. Without hesitation, she picked it up and aimed it steadily at the nearest of Walsh's men. "Drop your weapon." The man hesitated, assessing her resolve. Abigail cocked the hammer. "I said drop it." Something in her expression must have convinced him she wasn't bluffing, for he slowly placed his gun on the floor. The second man, seeing his companion disarmed and Pete's rifle trained on him through the window, followed suit. Walsh, still pinned beneath Quinn, snarled in fury. "You stupid woman, do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" "A thief and a would-be murderer," Abigail replied coldly. "I heard everything, Mr. Walsh." "As did I." Pete stepped through the doorway, his rifle unwavering. "Sheriff Davis will be mighty interested in what happened here tonight." Dawn was breaking by the time Sheriff Davis and his deputies arrived to take Walsh and his men into custody. The documents Quinn had secured, combined with the witnesses to Walsh's threats, ensured the mining magnate would face serious charges. As the lawmen departed with their prisoners, Quinn turned to Abigail, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. "You shouldn't have come back," he said quietly. "It was too dangerous." "I couldn't leave you to face him alone." Abigail's voice wavered slightly as the night's tension finally caught up with her. "Not after everything." Quinn stepped closer, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You could have been killed." "So could you," she met his gaze directly. "I think we make a good team." "Quinn Jameson." Something shifted in his expression, the last of his carefully maintained distance giving way to unveiled emotion. "Better than good," he murmured. Pete cleared his throat pointedly from the doorway. "Think I'll check on those horses," he announced to no one in particular, making a tactful exit. Alone in the cabin's growing light, Quinn and Abigail stood facing each other, the events of the past 2 weeks binding them in ways neither had anticipated. "What happens now?" Abigail asked softly. Quinn's hand rose to her cheek, his touch tentative. "That depends on you. The stage to Billings leaves tomorrow. I can arrange passage if that's what you want. And if it isn't, then I'd ask you to stay." His voice deepened. "Not as my housekeeper, not as the bride some scheme delivered to my door, but as yourself, Abigail Kent, for as long as you wish." Abigail placed her hand over his. "And if I wish to stay permanently?" Quinn's eyes brightened with hope. "Then I'd consider myself the luckiest man in Montana territory. Even though I arrived under false pretenses, you arrived because someone thought bringing you here would be my downfall." Quinn smiled, a true smile that transformed his solemn face. "Instead, you became my salvation." Their first kiss was gentle, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more urgent, a confirmation of the connection that had grown between them, despite, or perhaps because of, the danger they'd faced together. When they finally parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I never believed in fate, Abigail. But I'm finding it hard to see your arrival as anything else." "Not fate," Abigail corrected softly. "Choice. We both chose to trust each other when we had every reason not to." In the weeks that followed, as winter settled fully over the Montana territory, Quinn and Abigail established a new rhythm to their lives. The silver discovery on the North Ridge proved substantial enough to clear Daniel's debts and provide capital for ranch improvements. Theodore Walsh, facing charges of fraud and attempted murder, languished in jail awaiting trial, his mining empire crumbling under investigation. Quinn and Abigail were married by Judge Harmon in a simple ceremony attended by Pete Simmons and a few neighboring ranchers who, with Walsh's influence removed, cautiously renewed friendships with the Jameson Ranch. Their wedding night, spent in the cabin where they had first met, held none of the awkwardness Abigail had once feared from marrying a stranger. Quinn's touch was both reverent and passionate, their union a natural extension of the trust and respect that had grown between them. Spring came early that year. As the snow receded from the valley, revealing tender green shoots beneath, Abigail stood on the porch of the cabin, their cabin now watching Quinn repair the corral fence. His shirt was off despite the crisp morning air, the muscles of his back and shoulders flexing with each swing of the hammer. Sensing her gaze, he turned, smiling when he saw her. In those few months, the lines of strain had eased from his face, replaced by a quiet contentment that still caught Abigail by surprise sometimes. "Everything all right?" he called. Abigail nodded, one hand resting lightly on her stomach where, though it was too early to show, their child was growing. She hadn't told him yet, wanting to be certain before sharing the news. But watching him now, strong and steady against the backdrop of the mountains they both now called home, Abigail felt no fear about the future. She had arrived in Montana as a mail-order bride, trembling with cold and uncertainty beside a stranger's fire. She had found, instead of the arranged marriage she'd expected, a partner who valued her strength as much as her softness, who had looked at her in her darkest moment and said with perfect confidence, "You're stronger than you think." Quinn was right. She was stronger than she'd known, strong enough to build a life here, in this wild, beautiful land, with the man who had taught her the difference between arrangement and love. As she descended the porch steps to join him in the spring sunshine, Abigail silently thanked whatever twist of fate, chance, or scheming had brought her to this place. The journey that had begun with deception had led, against all odds, to the truest thing she had ever known.